some of the survey.
Welcome to session 172C, book launch. Operation X. Please a big round of applause for G. Parthasarthi, Mohan Ranayan Samant, Sandeep Unithan, Vijay Kapil in conversation with Vishnu Som. Praveer Roy will introduce the session.
Good to hear a lot of clapping. Okay, war has inspired many films and books. There are 3 Bollywood films right now running in theaters. One is Uri, the second one is Battalion 608, and the third one is 72 Hours, The Death of a Martyr. We are here today to launch a very exciting new book titled Operation X. It's about the 1971 Indo-Pakistan War and liberation of Bangladesh. It's an untold saga of a small group of men who conducted covert naval operations as part of an overall war effort. In the author's opine, it was one of the world's largest exercises of its kind in the history of modern naval warfare. It was named appropriately Operation X. This complicated and innovative guerrilla operations against the Pakistan Army in East Pakistan was meticulously planned and known to only 5 people, the Prime Minister and 4 naval officers. The missions were executed by specially trained East Bengali college students as part of a wider undercover actions of the Mukti Bahini operations. There have been many books on this subject over the years. One named War in the Indian Ocean by Admiral Roy. Him being a naval officer, many of the secrets associated with that exercise went to the grave with him. Why are we telling this story today? And why is it so important in today's very touchy and sensitive times of secrecy and need-to-know basis? And I would like to quote from Admiral S.M. Nanda, who actually describes the purpose of such history and sub-recall. It is necessary to record that history, the professionalism, courage, and devotion to duty of the participants. They will at least have the satisfaction of leaving behind in the footprints of time their contribution to the honor and service of their country, which I am confident will enhance the image and tradition of sea forces of Peninsular India. So without much ado, now we hear the story from the principal participants themselves. Let me quickly introduce the only living member of this operation, Captain Samant, Mahavir Chakra, and one of India's original senior submariners. He commanded one of the third submarine in the Indian Navy. Commander Kapil has not been able to come today, but he was also a Royal Navy trained clearance diver. Along with him, they're ably supported by co-author Sandeep Unithan, who is the executive editor in India Today, and also has a book called Black Tornado. They will be in discussion with Ambassador Parthasarthi, national security expert, commentator, former ambassador to Pakistan, and a little known fact that before he joined the Foreign Service, he saw action in the 1965 war as part of the Armored Corps. And to stitch everything together, we have with us here Vishnu Som, who obviously needs no introduction. He's the principal anchor at NDTV and its defense correspondent. So over to you, Vishnu.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being over here. And I think what makes this session very special is that for the first time ever, we will be telling you a story which has never been told. You've heard about the surgical strikes, you've heard about Kargil, you would have read about 71 and 1965, perhaps even 47, 48, the wars that India has fought and the Sri Lanka operations. But what we will be talking to you today about is an aspect of India's military history which has not been looked at all. It's an incredible honor to be seated in a panel, not just with my close friend Sandeep Unnithan, the executive editor of India Today, but also with Captain Samant, who is a Mahavir Chakra winner. A Mahavir Chakra places this gentleman as among the bravest sons of India. And as we will tell you over the course of the next half an hour or so, the operations that he was involved in the 1971 war were operations you have never heard about. These were covert naval commando operations which resulted in the sinking of more tons of enemy shipping in what was then called East Pakistan than has ever taken place anywhere in the world since the Second World War. This was done by the Indian Navy. It was done by the Mukti Bahini, who were trained by the Indian Navy. Some of the people who were responsible for that were people like Captain Samant. Sandeep Unnithan has, for a period of several years, been working on bringing together details of these operations which were deeply classified despite the fact that, that many decades had passed since 1971. In simple terms, the Indian Navy was responsible for training perhaps the largest number of demolition divers, volunteers of the Mukti Bahini in some of the most difficult conditions, in riverine conditions, in then East Pakistan, what we call Bangladesh now, to completely demolish Pakistani forces and play a key role in the success of the Indian Armed Forces. That's the overall story of Operation X. Many more details we'll be talking to you in a few moments. But we have a small clip which we'd like you to see before we start this discussion.
1971. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in East Pakistan has just won an electoral mandate to become the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Accustomed to treating the eastern wing of the country as a colony, the military dictatorship of General Yahya Khan in West Pakistan launches a genocide against the residents of its eastern wing, flooding India with lakhs of refugees. With the violence in East Pakistan reaching a crescendo, the Indian government is faced with a difficult option: remain a mute spectator to the savagery on its eastern borders, or take action and go to war against its western neighbor.
A government which has killed more than 1 million people, which has created conditions of barbarity which I don't think the world has very seldom seen, perhaps against the Jews in Hitler's.
A government of Bangladesh in exile was set up in Calcutta, even as India began training over 100,000 Mukti Bahini or liberation fighters who would fight a war of independence. Thus was born Naval Commando Operations X, comprising Indian Navy officers and divers, 8 deserters from a Pakistani submarine, and a ragtag bunch of educated but motivated Bengali youth fleeing the genocide. It was one of India's largest covert operations, meant to destabilize the West Pakistani efforts to bring East Pakistan to its knees. The naval operation was methodically planned by Navy Chief Admiral S.M. Nanda, his intelligence chief Captain M.K. Roy, and his staff officer Commander M.N.R. Samant.
That we are to recruit, select youth from Bangladesh country for our operations to act as naval commandos, and they were to be trained within a matter of 3 months to launch a first attack on Pakistan shipping in Chittagong, Narayanganj, and about selected Pakistani inland and main ports of East Pakistan.
News came from the Chittagong city area that Bangladesh, some miscreants, has blown up 9 ships, and the Chittagong port has become non-operational internationally and nationally. So the Chittagong port became totally, blocked. And that is how the Pakistani lost their lifeline.
This riverine guerrilla war was unlike any seen in recent naval history. The assault swimmers disabled or sank over 100,000 tons of shipping in a 4-month campaign between August and November 1971. Bangladesh was finally liberated when the Indian Army attacked and forced the surrender of all Pakistani forces on December 16, 1971. Revealed for the first time, Here is the explosive, authentic account of the covert guerrilla operation that went for the maritime jugular of Pakistan and facilitated the birth of Bangladesh.
ছাড়বো না ছাড়বো না মুক্তিযুদ্ধের সংগ্রাম ছাড়বো না
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, that's what we are talking about. These were operations that Captain M.N.R. Samant, Mahavir Chakra, played a key role in. Sandeep, let me come to you first. In simple terms, what was the role of these commandos? What did they achieve?
Well, Vishnu, you said it. The goal of the operation was to convert a very large core of educated Bengali college students into Marine commandos. And they did that in record time. In 3 months, they were churning out, they set up a training camp in West Bengal. And they were trained by naval divers. And in a span of about 5 months, they had trained something like 500 naval commandos. A very large number. I don't think it's been done since the Second World War. And these were university students who were fleeing the persecution in East Pakistan. And they were trained to go back as naval commandos, limpet-ears. They were trained to use limpet mines and attack naval shipping inside East Pakistan to basically render all this inoperable. They sank something like 100,000 tons of shipping. It's incredible. It's never been done since the Second World War, bringing out.
Captain Samant, just for the benefit of the audience, who were the people who were trained? How difficult was it to train them because they had to become expert swimmers before they could become expert divers? Tell us about the selection process of these divers. How difficult was it to get these men to a particular standard?
Thank you. Actually, the first thing which I must clear is that the swimming ability of Bengalis. Bengal, as you know, is a riverine country, and the entire traffic, communications, logistics depends upon who controls the rivers. Bengali, as such, we found the students were excellent swimmers. They didn't require any other provocation to go in water and achieve the task. So the question of selecting and giving them training didn't exactly quite arise, except that when it was modified to our requirement of using swimming fins. And selection process, what we decided was to select people or depending upon the different targets and people from that region of the East Bengal, so that their accent and the topography, it all meets our requirements, and they don't get captured by East Pakistanis. We went in our team to select people, personal interviews, and medical examinations, and then see their determination to fight for the Bangladesh. So there were lots of infiltrators also at that time. I hate to tell you this, but we have to weed them out, and it went off very nicely. Within a matter of 15 days, we managed to produce about a couple of hundred volunteers and get them to a camp near Palasi, near Calcutta.
Okay, so we'll come back to the rest of that story in a bit. But Sandeep, the operations themselves, these divers, which there would have been some Indians also perhaps involved in the actual diving, there certainly were, they would need to swim at shallow depths while being completely concealed, while carrying high explosives with them in the form of mines, and then plant them on ships, right, and boats. Tell us about that part of the operations, the actual operations themselves.
Right. Well, Vishnu, a quick word about the organization itself, Naval Commando Operations X, NCOX. It's a very unusual organization which was run by Naval Intelligence directly from Delhi. Captain M.K. Roy, who was working under the Navy Chief Admiral Nanda. You had Captain Samant, the man on the ground, a submariner. You had naval divers. You had 8 deserters from a Pakistani submarine. Very unusual. India facilitated the desertion of these guys from France, where they were training. Some of them had been on the PNS Ghazi as well. And then they had this large corps of assault swimmers. So the word for it is assault swimmers because they simply couldn't afford diving sets for everyone. So they would train them as surface swimmers with a limpet mine, carrying a limpet mine. And they were taught camouflage swimming, which is basically how you swim backwards with the tide, plant your limpet mine on the merchant ship, and then just
So they weren't
escape with
completely
the tide.
concealed in many cases.
Well, they were
They were
trained.
actually swimming on the surface
They were
at night.
Has to be at night because daytime would have been easy target for anyone to be.
And how heavy were the mines that they were carrying?
How heavy?
Heavy were they, the mines that they were carrying?
Well, it varied, depends upon which wind type you used, but average was 3.5 to 4 kilograms minimum.
All right. That's not easy when you're swimming across with a weight attached to you on the surface. Carry on, Sandeep. So by night, given good tidal conditions, many of them with just fins and the mines attached to them were swimming up past Pakistani patrols, inside Pakistani harbors, and then what were they doing?
Well, there was meticulous intelligence on the ships in each of these ports. So what we have, and this is the book that a sample of the chapter is available for reading. It's called Operation Jackpot. This is when they actually struck on the night of 16th of August 1971, 15th and 16th of August 1971, where you had something like over 200 commandos were infiltrated into East Pakistan and simultaneously struck at 4 ports in a 700 square kilometer radius. And you had this spectacle of hundreds of commandos launching themselves into the water and targeting ships. And you can just imagine what it must have been like to be a Pakistani army officer standing there on the port, watching these explosions go off and these ships carrying ammunition and fuel and supplies for the Pakistan army just exploding and sinking alongside. And it was a terrific operation. I mean, the kind of planning and training that was carried out to, deliver that blow called Operation Jackpot. Very few operations have been carried out that way.
Ambassador Parthasarathi, how were these operations critical in the overall context of 1971, given the fact that Pakistan depended on boats and ships to transport everything it had, because the Indian Air Force prevented overflights, the Indian Navy was far out at sea, so local operations by boats and small ships, how were they critical in keeping the Pakistani establishment alive?
Look, army in these circumstances facing a hostile people, I mean, it was viewed as an army of occupation in Bangladesh. They naturally need supplies from West Pakistan. They were getting supplies from outside. We know the Chinese, some Arab countries, and the West were providing weapons till the very end. But if you want to destroy an army's morale from fighting, you have to deny them supplies. What was crucial, I think, in this was the fact that we could pick up submariners actually working on a Pakistani submarine. I think it was in Spain. France and then Spain. We picked them up and we brought them to India. Captain headed the force which included these Pakistani ex-Navy men who were Bangladeshis to be the sort of focus of these operations. Also, there is a thing known as deniability. It was, as far as we were concerned, a Bangladeshi operation, yes, facilitated. But the most remarkable thing, I think, about that point in time, and I think this needs, as Captain has also, and it comes out in the book, is the secrecy and the chain of command. It was just the Prime Minister and just the naval chiefs, nobody else. And this is something we have to learn. And I was in Moscow at that time, and really, one, I didn't know what she was doing there, but to see Mrs. Gandhi dealing with 3 Soviet leaders was something. This does come in the book.
We'll look at that as well. But Sandeep, let's talk about the submarine that these Pakistani, they were Bangladeshis, they were Bengali officers who were, and sailors who were on. They got out while they were being trained on a then state-of-the-art submarine in France, which Pakistan was acquiring. They went from country to country, escaping detection to somehow get to an Indian embassy, and then they were whisked across to India, and they fought for India and, of course, for their own cause in these operations. Tell us about this part of the story and how, and the linkage between this and these clandestine operations.
Well, Vishnu, that's a very key part of the book. The flight of these 8 submariners from France. They're training there in a Pakistani submarine, and they're ready to make the voyage back to Karachi when the Pakistan Army begins its crackdown. And very quickly, a group of Bengali sailors decides to escape. They said, we cannot be part of the armed force that does this to our own people. They go to the Indian consulate in Spain, and they make an incredible escape. And then finally, they're picked up by a very resourceful IFS officer, a batchmate of Partha sir. And they are transported by Air India back into India. And I believe, Captain Samant can add to this, that the operation would not have been possible, the whole entire operation would not have been possible had these 8 submariners not defected and they had not come over to the Indian side. In fact, the whole idea began with their defection.
Tell us about those submariners. Why were they so important for these operations?
You see, the reason was this, that when those 8 submariners who escaped provided a leadership for future groups of commandos which we intend to launch into Bangladesh, because when the Pakistan Army took over East Pakistan, none of the Bengali officers of the Pakistan Navy could escape, and they were bottled up in Karachi. So we had no professional leadership at that level, and this leadership at an intermediate level was provided by these 8 sailors who escaped.
Sandeep, another fascinating story, and I'll bring in the captain as well on this, were the actual mines. Now, these mines needed to be attached to the hull of the ship or in different parts of the ship, depending on where the ships and the boats were vulnerable. The swimmer needed time to get away before the explosion took place, otherwise they would die. Now, this was a difficult process because India actually had not very many of these limpet mines which were available. And secondly, the trigger mechanism to ensure that these mines gave the swimmers enough time to get away is also something that needed to have been sorted out. And there was an element of desi jugaad in this as well. Sandeep, how did that work?
Well, Vishnu, very clearly, if you're going to have limpet mines used in this operation, they cannot be used from any other country. You can't have imported mines. So we had to, in record time, the DRDO and the Navy churned out these limpet mines. They were codenamed footballs because they looked like half footballs. And the firing mechanism, as you said, was improvised. They had a soluble plug that would dissolve in the water, and once it dissolved, the firing chain would be initiated and it would explode, triggering off the 4 kgs of explosives. So this was actually for all the people who say that we can't do it, we have technical challenges. You have to see how remarkably swiftly these mines have developed in a matter of weeks, virtually. And they were deployed, over 500-600 of them were produced serially, and the men were trained to use it. So that was one of the reasons that Captain Samant's men started looking for educated Bengali youth, which is because there was an element of technical expertise involved in handling these mines and knowing how to deploy them and all of those things.
Captain Samant, you were telling me before we started, it was over some rum in, I guess, the officers' mess, where you decided how to fix the mechanism to trigger these mines. What was the process, and what exactly did this water-soluble element of the mine ensure?
You see, the mine or any other firing mechanism has got to explode only after completing a circuit. Now, in these mines, which we had devised, there was a soluble plug made of sugar, which used to melt in 30 minutes after touching the water. And in the 30 minutes, the diver had to attach that limpet mine to the ship's side, get away and escape, and sometimes it didn't happen and the poor chap died. Fortunately, none of our people died in this accident. And so in order to give additional safety for the diver, we have to devise some means of making sure that while the mine is being attached to the ship's side, it doesn't dissolve and start the firing mechanism. The only way we could do it is either to devise a mine with a larger time mechanism, which was not possible, or else do something to modify the present one. We modified it over a glass of, solution came over a glass of liquor in one of our tents. And I hate to say that, but we solved that problem by using a condom to cover that plug. And it worked beautifully well, and we were able to achieve our objectives.
How remarkable is that? The process of triggering this mine to ensure that the diver could actually get away from their safe took place on the basis of two aspects. There was sugar, and enough sugar. If the sugar got dissolved in the water, the circuit would start and it would be completed and it would then explode. So only a right amount of sugar had to be put. And when it fully dissolved, the explosion would take place. But that wasn't good enough. So a condom was actually used to be a part of the mechanism to ensure that the diver had enough time to save his life. This was the contraption which was actually used to sink 100,000 tons of Pakistani shipping in 1971. Now you can turn around and say that 100,000 tons is just the size of one supercarrier or one big cargo vessel in today's context. But what we were looking at in 1971 was small boats. Not one, not two, but hundreds of them. Small trawlers, small inland waterway boats. So the number of boats.
Also, the psychological effect of one ship blowing in international insurance market and the cargo rates is fantastic. As happened after the first attack in Chittagong in August, the insurance market by Lloyd's of London increased to such an extent that it became totally non-productive for Pakistanis to export their goods from Karachi to Chittagong and continue with the traffic. Just one ship sinking has a tremendous psychological effect, remember that.
Sandeep, the monitoring of the operation itself. Tell us a little bit about the officers who were involved. What was the plan and how did the message ultimately get back to the Prime Minister? How was she actually overseeing everything?
Well, Vishnu, now that's a mystery to a lot of us. We know for a fact that these operations were directly under the Navy Chief, and the Navy Chief was, working under the Prime Minister. It was a very small circle of need to know, on a need-to-know basis of the number of people who knew of this operation, and it was so secret that even the Director of Naval Operations at that time, Admiral Dawson, at that time Captain Dawson, wasn't aware of this, and I believe he was pretty unhappy when the attacks took place in August, and he got to know of it after it. That is how tight that circle was. Now, we have reason to believe that the Prime Minister was on the loop at every stage of this operation, including the planning and finally, of course, when the assault swimmers crossed into East Pakistan. But I've been unable to make that final chain because Admiral Nanda is not with us anymore, and he's possibly the only person, or Captain Roy for that matter, who could have answered that question of how deep was the Prime Minister's involvement in this operation. But very quickly, one point that I want to make. In fact, I was talking to Mrs. Samant yesterday, and she mentioned at the investiture ceremony on January 1972, when Captain Samant was awarded his Mahavir Chakra, the Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi, walks up to Mrs. Samant and says, "How did you manage to stay on your own for so many months when your husband was away?" So she very clearly knew about this, and he may have been just a commander at that time, equal to a lieutenant colonel, but she clearly knew his importance in the whole operation.
That's an incredible story. How long were you, Captain, away from your family, from the onset of the operations till the end of the operations?
I was there before, during, and after. So almost a year plus.
Tell us a little bit about Operation Jackpot. And tell us a little bit about your own feelings, your own tension, your own stress as the go-ahead was given.
The question of tension doesn't arise because when you were given orders in the defense forces, you carry them out. As Mr. Parsarthi will also agree because he has seen both sides of the aspect. When the war started, we were in our stations and we were just picked up at random and being told that in service fashion, you volunteers, whether you liked it or not, you were in it. And you just stuck on to it. As far as your, what was the other question which you had?
No, just the process of the operations themselves. As Operation Jackpot started, just tell us about, you said there was no tension, but tell us about the sense of anticipation, all that training, the risks involved. Tell us about, you know, the feeling, as it were, where you were located, where you were based.
The feelings where we were based was in anticipation of what could possibly happen. And as you know, when the war starts, anything can happen and anything is possible. We were thrilled, at least some of us in a very wicked sense, that at last we are getting a chance to prove the viability of our professional training which we undergone with the British and others for so many years. That was the first feeling. And nobody really cared about what was going to happen. In commando operations, you don't worry about these things. You have a certain objective which you achieve with limited resources, achieve it and call it a day and hope for the next one.
Ambassador Parthasarthi, from the larger standpoint, just in terms of the role of the Indian Navy in 1971, because of course the Army played a fantastic role, the Air Force played a fantastic role. How was the Navy also key in operations towards the objectives in 71?
Well, let's put it this way. We seldom look at maritime power. The Navy by that time had the strength to almost blockade supplies, which they did. The other point to be borne in mind is that much of this was covert. And unfortunately, it never becomes public. It has now in this case. Because a successful war or an operation has to be totally successful, done quietly, and much later are the results announced. Here the results were maximal, the achievements were maximal, and hats off to Captain Samant and the others that they held their voice for 50 years before they decided to go public.
Sandeep, how difficult was it for you to get this story out?
I wouldn't have been able to get this story out had Captain Samant not decided to write his book. It's as simple as that. It was, this is a story that I became aware of about 25 years back when Admiral M.K. Roy wrote his book, War in the Indian Ocean. It's a very fine book where he mentions the naval commando aspects of the Mukti Bahini. And that's when I started, looking at it as a possible book somewhere in the future. And in his book, he actually leaves a trail of breadcrumbs. He never takes credit for any of this because obviously it was just 25 years after the war. I'm sure he was working on something bigger. He's not with us anymore. Unfortunately, it would have been great to hear his perspective on these operations. But as for writing the book, as I said, it would have been impossible without Captain Samant had he not decided to write this.
Captain, commando operations meant that you operated under a veil of secrecy. And yet many decades had passed. At what stage did you feel it was important for the story to be told?
You see, I would have kept quiet all my life, except that when I was observing that in this conflict, a lot has been written. In fact, hundreds of pages have been written, by well-versed authors on Army and Air Force side. And it covers the land and air operations of Bangladesh main war. But there was nothing I found, regrettably, which covered the aspects which we have covered, that is the strangling of East Pakistan's supply lines in the East Pakistan itself, and thereby paralyze the Pakistan army. And we were the first ones to open attack after the war started, before the army came in, and before the guerrilla warfare from Mukti Bahari started. And I thought it was unfair on my boys who had sacrificed to such an extent, left their houses, died, and all that, that their names and their deeds are not at all recorded anywhere. That is where I decided to pen down whatever I have, and that's what I've done.
And thank you so much for sharing these details with us. Sandeep, we talk about the Indian Navy's Marcos, the Marine Commandos, who are among the foremost commando forces that we employ in India today. How are those Marcos born from the legacy created by officers like Captain Samant?
Well, when the operation finally ended in December 1971, Captain Samant submitted a report which recommended that the Indian Navy raise a Marine Commando force. And it's as clear as that. And it took the Navy 15 years to raise a special naval commando force. The Pakistanis already had it by then. In fact, the book opens with the fact that the Navy is actually anticipating attacks of this nature by the Pakistanis. And it took us 15 years to actually finally raise a force like the Marine Commando Force, which is a special amphibious assault unit which can carry out demolition operations and of the like that we did in 1971.
Captain Samant, right after the operations, the Indian Navy officers who were part of the leadership of all of these operations, what happened to all of you? Were you involved in conceiving future Indian naval clandestine operations? Or were the skills that you picked up, were they spread over the Navy? Did they become institutionalized, or were they forgotten for the moment?
I'm afraid it's a mixture of all the points which you just said. But most of us had to return to our units and continue with the normal peacetime naval service. But there are some thoughts like starting the Marine Commando Force survived, and I'm glad they did, because that resulted ultimately, maybe after 15 years, in formation of our own Naval Commando Force. Pakistan Naval Commando Force was so strong, I'll tell you, from the time when we established our first camp in Palasi, there was an attempt by Pakistani Naval Commandos to attack us by coming across from Chittagong. I know it because my own classmate was commanding that, from Pakistan side, was commanding that force. And they could do it, and we were just twiddling our thumbs, I thought, at that time.
What he mentions is actually quite interesting, because a lot of people, particularly a lot of the younger people in this audience, may not know that right up to 1971, Indian officers and Pakistani officers who were fighting against each other would actually have been friends before independence took place. They had fought together, they had, perhaps in the Second World War, they had certainly trained together, and there were occasions, there were instances when they would actually communicate with each other on the radio, Indians communicating with Pakistanis, and after doing that, they would start hitting each other with guns and bullets. So that's something which is interesting. So the point the captain mentioned was interesting. A particular Pakistani operation and a particular Pakistan unit was actually headed by somebody he knew very well. They were friends at one level, but they were fighting each other in a war for two different countries. That's an interesting part of history. And it ended a few decades back as these soldiers got older. I'd like to open the floor up now for questions, if there are any. If you can raise your hands. Yes, to the gentleman over here. Go ahead. If you can just ask a question, we'll bring a mic to you. They'll just come with a mic. Just 1 second.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I understand the Marcos deal with the most sensitive operations known to the country. I just wanted to know, sir, how long does the unit, how often does the unit work alongside the special group? If you could comment or say something about the special group as well, that'd be a great help.
I think Sandeep might want to take that question. The operations.
I'm not aware of any such operations.
Well, sir, it was a unit that was developed by R.N. Kao in 1981 under Project Sunray. It was specifically designed for high sensitive operations in Punjab during the Bhinderwale crisis.
Yes.
I'm
not aware of any such operation with the special group or otherwise.
Listen, I think I can answer you that question. You have special operation groups in every services. Even the BSF has special operations groups. The operations they carry out are specialized to their role. The Naval Commando does it with regard to maritime operations, hitting ports, hitting maritime targets. The special operations groups otherwise do it generally along land borders. But they are for specific role, differently armed, differently equipped, but functioning under the similar command structure.
Probir, you had a story to share. Go ahead.
Excuse me, sir.
It's a secret book, I know, but there's something which is also secret, which I don't know whether Sandeep has picked on in his book. The war could have taken a totally different angle. One day, Admiral Nanda, General Aurora, Captain Roy were in a helicopter, and the helicopter crashed a few miles inside East Pakistan. They were all in the civilian clothes. If they had been caught that day, the war could have taken an entire different turn. The war could have ended there and there itself. My father was the only one who had a knowledge of Bengali, so somehow he got a cycle rickshaw wala to take him to the nearest police station. And they reached the police station where they called for the local army battalion, and they came and picked them up in a jeep. But this, I don't know whether this is in your book, but... And Captain Saban was also in the helicopter.
In that rescue operation, Admiral Nanda and late Admiral Roy had come to my camp to inspect the people, and we were returning back to Calcutta by an army elevator aircraft, in which I was told by Admiral Nanda to jump into it. So I jumped with my lungi on to go to Calcutta. And that aircraft crashed immediately after taking off after 30 minutes or so. And I had to bicycle down and go to police station, which he is mentioning, and commandeer police force to help us get the VVIPs away from there, because we were hardly 4 or 5 miles from the Pakistan border. And had we been captured, we would have been a bit of a different story to tell. And it is quite a fantastic story.
It's a remarkable story, and it's in the book, and you can read it in May of this year.
Okay, we'll just take 2 more questions because we need to unveil the book. So yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Hi. Thanks for that, sir. It was nice to know that condoms do prevent unintended accidents. That was very interesting. So I used to be a military and foreign affairs analyst on Capitol Hill, and my question to you is actually one Mr. Roy asked me to ask in this panel again. Is there still a military solution to Pakistan from the Indian side? Because, I mean, the US, China militaries don't overtly intervene in any conflict. I mean, they might send supplies, but they will be more hands-off now.
So, I think that's a question for which we need to keep about 10 separate sessions, and then we only hit the first chapter. Is there a military solution to Pakistan? I think it's a difficult, complicated answer. I cover this on a daily basis, as does Sandeep, and I think it depends on where the militaries of either side actually lie. But in the context of both India and Pakistan being nuclear states, I'm not sure that you can have a macro military solution quite in the manner as one could have had it leading up to, say, the mid-80s, after which the nuclear aspect started getting more developed. Yes, sir.
Sir, good afternoon. This is Colonel Mohan Sharma, sir. It is an amazing operation which you are part of, and your clarity at this age and this time is amazing. So, my respect to you, sir. I'm an engineer officer, sir, from Corps of Engineers, and I had an opportunity to head the engineering part, or ID part in NSG also. Sandeep has met me a few times there. I'm really curious to know, sir, in this operation, what you call today IED, essentially that mine was, and today we'll call it as an IED, improvised explosive device. Did you have any engineer input from, let's say, military side, or maybe your commandos themselves are trained, or maybe DRDO came into play and helped you to the last stage of the whole thing? How the operation was done up?
I'll answer that question, sir. All the naval divers were all trained explosives, ordnance disposal experts. They were all very well versed. They'd all been trained by the Royal Navy, and they knew very well how to handle explosives, especially limpet mines and improvising IEDs and so on and so
I've
forth.
worked with them. I have an idea of that. You're talking to a military man. What I'm saying still, the kind of expertise and the level and the range of the operation you carried out with this, it still requires, in my view, either those guys getting trained specially, or as you said, DRDO could really muster up things very quickly and do it.
It's a combination of several.
sense.
So the back end, the production was handled by the DRDO, the Ordnance Factory Board, and the Naval Armaments Depot. The divers were the ones who were instructing the recruits in the use of these limpet mines, and of course they knew of all of these. And it's mentioned in the book actually. When it's out, you'll probably get to read more about it. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Yes. To the young man over there, yeah. Who's got his hand up, yeah.
Thank you, Vishnu, for giving me a chance. My name is Varun. I have a question, sir. What happened to those 8 submariners? Did they go to East Pakistan? And a question to Ambassador Parthasarathy, will Pakistan ever stop trying to do an East Pakistan to us?
I'll answer the first part of your question. There were 8 submariners, out of which only 2 are alive today. There's Commodore Chaudhary, who you saw in that short film. He's one of the highest decorated Bangladeshi naval officers. He's the person, he was actually the ringleader of the so-called mutiny on the Mangro. And the only other person who's alive today, unfortunately, is Badiul Alam. So out of the 8 submariners, 4 of them led the attack on on various targets inside East Pakistan. You can read it in the chapter that we are giving out. HarperCollins is, printed out a special excerpt. Vishnu is just holding it up. You can read more about it there. Out of the 8 submariners, 4 of them led these special operations inside Bangladesh. And in fact, all of them participated. And as I said, there are only 2 alive today. And Parthasarathy sir has something.
What was the second question?
Stop trying to do an East Pakistan to us.
Sir, in 30 seconds.
Very quickly, your guess is as good as mine, but it can be any time. It really depends on how long the military establishment, which will not forget what they have all narrated to you, rules Pakistan. Till their internal equations are sorted out. And what is often missed out is there have been, and they are still being kept secret, which I believe they shouldn't be. We came pretty close to solutions not too many years ago. You have to wait for an opportunity. But remember, there are no military solutions, exclusively military solutions to long-term problems. There has to be a diplomatic, political element.
All right, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to wrap up this session. And I'd like to invite Sandeep and Captain Samant to come up as we unveil this book.